Mafia boss sees his cleaner hiding bruises. What he did next left the entire city in shock. He saw the bruises before she saw him. One glimpse, one lie, and the devil of Chicago decided someone else was going to burn. The cleaner thought she was scrubbing marble. She didn't know she'd just unleashed the kind of justice that doesn't end in courtrooms, but in flames. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. From the doorway, Angelo Silvestro said nothing at first. His black shirt was unbuttoned at the throat, the gold skull pendant glinting against his skin like a warning. He had seen violence before, inflicted it, ordered it, but what he saw on her wasn't business. It was cruelty. "Who did that to you?" he asked finally. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of judgment. Michaela froze mid-motion. "It's nothing, Mr. Silvestro. I tripped." Angelo stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The faint light from the chandelier caught her tear-streaked cheek. He could tell, not just from the marks, but from the tremor in her breath, that she'd been lying for a very long time. Angelo Silvestro didn't believe in coincidence. He noticed everything. The hesitation before a confession, the glance people gave before they betrayed you. It was why he was still alive when most of his enemies weren't. And now his focus was on her, a woman too quiet, too careful, as if the air itself might turn against her. In the reflection of the marble floor, he saw her face, the fear, the shame, and something inside him shifted. "What happened, Michaela?" he asked, softer this time. "I told you. I just slipped," she whispered. Her voice cracked halfway through the lie. "Both arms." She didn't answer. His silence stretched until it felt heavy enough to crush the room. Finally, she looked up, eyes red, breath shaking. "Please, don't ask. It's nothing you can fix." Angelo studied her, jaw tight, expression unreadable. He'd built his empire on control, on knowing when to strike, when to wait, and when to walk away. But this wasn't business. This was something else. Someone had hurt a woman under his roof. And that meant only one thing. "You work in my house," he said quietly. "That means you're under my protection." Whoever did this already made their last mistake. She blinked, unsure if it was a threat or a promise. Then she turned and left, clutching the mop like a shield. When the door closed, Angelo stood in silence for a long time. Then, without looking away from the floor where her tears had fallen, he pulled out his phone. "Enzo," he said, "find out everything about Michaela D. Perez, where she lives, who she talks to, and who's been putting bruises on her skin." A pause on the line. Discreetly, Enzo asked. Angelo's voice dropped an octave. "No, let him feel watched." Outside, the morning light spilled over the lake, gold and cold. Inside, the king of Chicago's underworld decided justice didn't always come with a badge. Sometimes, it came wearing a gold skull. That was the moment the city began to shift, quietly, invisibly, as if a storm had been set in motion beneath its polished skyline. And at the center of it stood a man the world feared, now fighting for someone who couldn't fight back. The morning after, the Silvestro estate felt different. It wasn't louder, but heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Angelo sat at his study desk, eyes on the lake as it reflected the steel-gray sky. The city beyond it was waking up, unaware that its balance had already shifted. Somewhere out there was the man who'd left bruises on Michaela Perez's arms, and Angelo had given an order that could not be undone. The door opened with a soft click. Enzo Romano entered, carrying a manila folder so thick it strained the clasp. His expression was the kind that meant bad news. He placed the folder on the desk and said quietly, "You asked for everything on Michaela D. Perez. You're not going to like it." Angelo turned, motioning for him to sit. "Start talking." Enzo flipped open the folder. The first photo showed a smiling man, good suit, expensive watch, the kind of grin that never reached the eyes. "Rico Calderon," Enzo said. Owns a high-end club downtown. Luna Noir, real moneymaker. Politicians, cops, influencers, they all go there. Makes his fortune laundering campaign money and buying silence. Angelo's eyes trailed the photo. And Michaela? She used to work there? Enzo replied. Hired as cleaning staff 3 years ago. Didn't last long. Internal incident report says she had an altercation with the manager, Rico himself. A week later, she quit. 2 months after that, she filed a complaint with the city labor office. It disappeared before it reached a desk. Angelo leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Disappeared? Enzo nodded. Calderon's cousin is deputy commissioner of police. Complaints go missing. Victims get scared. Some vanish. A long silence followed. Only the soft tick of the desk clock filled the room. Angelo's gaze sharpened. He hurts women. Not just her, Enzo said, sliding another document across the desk. A list of names, most of them marked unreachable or no current address. Different women, same pattern. Threats. Payoffs. Disappearances. No convictions. Angelo flipped through the papers, the fury beneath his calm expression tightening with each page. He does this for sport. Enzo sighed. And for leverage. He films everything, blackmail material. Keeps people quiet. That was when Angelo stopped reading. His jaw flexed once. Then he closed the file slowly, like a man sealing a coffin. Enzo, he said. Yeah, boss. You know my code. Enzo met his eyes. I know it. Angelo spoke the words quietly, but with finality. You don't hurt people who can't fight back. It wasn't a threat. It was a law. The kind that didn't need courts or signatures to be enforced. He rose from his chair and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, Chicago's skyline shimmered. Towers built on secrets and money. I want him watched. Every phone call, every meeting, every step he takes. Follow the money. Trace his accounts. Infiltrate his club. If he breathes, I want to know where the air came from. Enzo nodded, already pulling out his phone. You want me to keep it quiet? Angelo turned, the faintest hint of a smirk crossing his face. No. Let him feel eyes on him. Men like that only understand fear when it starts looking back. By noon, the Silvestro network was moving. Drivers who once ferried cash across the city now followed Rico Calderon's luxury sedan through side streets. A hacker known only as Kite was pulling transaction logs from Luna Noir's offshore servers. Even the club's bartender, a former Silvestro runner, was back on payroll, feeding updates through encrypted messages. Every shadow in Calderon's life now belonged to Angelo Silvestro. But while the operation moved like clockwork, one person in the mansion began to feel its tremors. Michaela noticed them first in small ways. New faces on the property, men who lingered near the gates longer than usual. The air was different, heavy with something she couldn't name. One afternoon, she overheard 2 guards speaking in low tones outside the laundry room. Boss said no one gets near her, one muttered. Yeah? Then why's the street 2 blocks down crawling with watchers? She froze, clutching a damp towel, her pulse hammering. Near her? That night, she lay awake in her small servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of the city outside, sirens, horns, the distant hum of nightlife, all felt sharper. She wondered if Rico had found her again. Maybe he'd sent people to watch her, to remind her that running was useless. The next morning, she tried to ask Mrs. Chan, the housekeeper, if something was wrong. But Mrs. Chan just smiled too quickly and said, You focus on your work, dear. Mr. Silvestro handles everything else. That answer didn't help. It terrified her. Meanwhile, in a dim office downtown, Enzo sat across from Angelo once more. He dropped a USB drive onto the desk. You'll want to see this. Angelo plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, footage from a hidden camera. Rico Calderon at his club, laughing with a police officer and a city councilman, passing a thick envelope across the table. Angelo watched in silence. The laugh, the handshake, the arrogance, it all burned into his memory. Then came another clip. Rico alone in a private booth, hand gripping a woman's arm too tightly as she tried to pull away. Her face was blurred, but her trembling was not. Angelo stopped the playback. The silence between him and Enzo felt suffocating. "This is the man who thinks he owns my city," Angelo said, almost to himself. "He thinks the law protects him." Enzo nodded. "So what's the move?" Angelo's answer was cold and steady. "We take away his protection, one lie at a time." That night, Michaela walked through the estate's corridors after finishing her shift. She stopped at the grand hall where she'd first met his eyes. The marble still gleamed, but her reflection looked different now. Smaller, more fragile. She felt watched again, not by menace, but by intent. Somewhere in the house, she knew Angelo was moving pieces for reasons she didn't understand. Still, part of her couldn't shake the dread. Whenever men took interest in her life, bad things followed. She glanced out the tall windows, toward the city skyline glowing in the distance. Somewhere out there, Rico Calderon still lived freely, charming in public, monstrous in private. Her hands clenched into fists. Maybe the world would never change, she thought. Maybe monsters always win. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that one of those monsters had finally turned against his own kind. Ever ignored a gut feeling? Asterisk, asterisk, the people who didn't survived. The ones who did, their stories ended too soon. Subscribe, because sometimes what you don't know can hurt you. Asterisk. 3 days passed before Angelo called Michaela into his office again. By then, the house had changed its rhythm. Conversations hushed when she entered a room. Guards nodded politely but avoided eye contact. Even the air seemed thicker, weighted with things unsaid. She felt it pressing on her shoulders, the way people feel a storm before it breaks. So when the intercom buzzed and Mrs. Chan's voice said, "Mr. Silvestro would like to see you," Michaela's first thought was that she'd done something wrong. She wiped her hands on her apron, straightened her uniform, and walked the long corridor toward the study. Her heart thudded unevenly. The last time she'd been in that room, she'd lied badly. When she reached the door, she hesitated before knocking. "Come in," Angelo's voice said. Calm. Controlled. Too calm. She entered. The office was dim, lit only by the morning light filtering through the tall windows. Angelo sat behind his desk, the city skyline stretching behind him like a steel ocean. A file folder lay open in front of him, but his eyes were on her. "Sit," he said quietly. She did, perching on the edge of the leather chair like someone afraid to sink too deep. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he turned the folder toward her. Photographs. Documents. Newspaper clippings. Each image caught her breath. Rico Calderon shaking hands with a police officer. Rico laughing beside a city councilman. Rico whispering something into a woman's ear while his hand clamped down on her wrist. Her voice barely came out. Where did you get these?" "Doesn't matter," Angelo said. "What matters is that he's not just a bad man. He's protected." Michaela's eyes darted across the papers, the memories hitting like punches. She had seen that smile too many times, the one he wore before he hurt someone. "I don't want revenge," she whispered. Her throat burned with the effort to keep her voice steady. "I just want him to stop." Angelo leaned back in his chair, studying her as if weighing her words against his own instincts. "Revenge is a luxury," he said finally. "Justice is survival." She looked up at him, confused. "Justice?" He folded his hands, resting them on the desk. "You think walking away makes you safe? He'll find someone else. Another woman. Another life to ruin. Justice means stopping him so no one else ends up like you." Michaela's breath caught. "You don't understand." "Then make me," he said, voice low but firm. "Tell me who he is. Tell me everything." For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the window, to the skyline beyond it, and then back to the man in front of her. She saw no pity in Angelo's face, only intent. That made it easier to speak. She took a long breath and began. She had met Rico Calderon 3 years ago. He owned Luna Noir, a club that gleamed with mirrors and champagne, the kind of place where powerful men forgot their vows and their consciences. She had taken a cleaning job there after her mother's illness drained her savings. At first, he had been charming, attentive, generous. He'd given her rides home, told her she deserved better than scrubbing floors. But kindness had turned to control, control to jealousy, jealousy to bruises. When she tried to leave, he laughed. "No one leaves me, Michaela. Not until I'm done." She did escape, barely. One night, after a fight turned violent, she ran to the police. They listened, took notes, promised to investigate. Then the next morning, she found her statement missing from the record. 2 days later, a note was slipped under her door. "Nice try." Her voice shook as she continued. "That's when I knew I couldn't go to the law. So I tried something else. One of Rico's men, a bouncer named Jace, told me about their side business, trafficking women through the club. I convinced him to testify with me. But before the hearing, he was found dead in a warehouse fire. The police said it was an accident." She looked down, her eyes glistening. "After that, I disappeared. Changed my number, my job, my name on paper. The family I worked for moved away, and I thought maybe I could start over here." Angelo didn't speak for a long moment. His jaw tightened, his gaze hardening as she spoke. Every word carved itself into him like a blade. "You went to the police," he said finally, "and they did nothing." "They couldn't," she said bitterly. "Or wouldn't. And this man, he still runs that club?" "Yes. He still owns Luna Noir, still untouchable." Angelo rose from his chair and walked to the window. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, a silhouette of quiet rage. He had seen many kinds of men in his life: killers, thieves, traitors. But there was a particular kind of monster he despised, the ones who preyed on the weak because they believed the world would protect them. He turned back toward her. "You did the right thing. You tried to stop him the right way." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "And look where that got me." Angelo's eyes met hers. "It got you here, which means you're still breathing. And that means he hasn't won." Something flickered across Michaela's face, disbelief first, then the faintest ember of hope. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "You don't even know me." Angelo paused, then said, "Because I know men like him. And I know what happens when nobody fights back." He walked to the desk again, closing the folder. "You said you didn't want revenge. Good. Because this isn't about revenge. It's about balance." "Balance." He nodded. "You break the wrong kind of man, and it sends a message to all the others who think fear keeps them safe." Michaela frowned. "And what message is that?" "That some monsters get hunted too." When she left his office, Michaela felt strange, unsteady, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. For the first time, someone had looked at her story and not seen weakness. She didn't know what Angelo Silvestro planned next, but she could feel it, the weight of his decision, the gears turning somewhere in the shadows. Upstairs, the mansion's lights glowed warm against the darkening skyline. Downstairs, in his study, Angelo sat alone with the folder. He opened it again, not to read, but to remember. Her words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, he still owns Luna Noir. Still untouchable, asterisk. Not for long, he thought. He picked up his phone and dialed Enzo. "Get kite," he said. "We're going deeper. I want everything. His ledgers, his shipments, his connections. If he sneezes, I want to know what brand of tissue he uses." Enzo's voice came through the line. "What's the play, boss?" Angelo's tone was low, deliberate. "No play. This is work. We're cutting rot out of the city." He hung up and leaned back in his chair. Outside, thunder rumbled over Lake Michigan, a storm building far off, waiting to break. For the first time in years, Angelo Silvestro didn't feel like a man running an empire. He felt like something else entirely, a weapon with a purpose. Because now, this wasn't a rescue. It was a mission. Night bled into dawn over the Silvestro estate, painting the skyline in iron gray. Angelo hadn't slept. He sat in his office, the glow of multiple monitors washing over his face as lines of data flickered across the screens. Kite's voice crackled over the speaker, sharp, nasal, restless. You wanted everything on Calderon's network? You got it, boss. Files streamed in, one after another. Bank transfers, text threads, photos of envelopes exchanged in back rooms thick with cigar smoke. Angelo's jaw tightened as the images built a picture no court could ever convict on. But any honest man would see for what it was, rot. He's in deep, Kite continued. Half the city council's got their pockets lined with his money. Campaign donations, consulting fees, vacation homes in Lake Geneva. The deputy commissioner gets his mortgage paid through a dummy company tied to Calderon's club. Angelo exhaled slowly. And the press. Don't bother, Kite said. 2 journalists tried running stories 2 years ago. One's freelancing out of Milwaukee now. The other, well, her car went off a bridge. Police said it was icy. Silence filled the room like a pulse. Angelo's reflection in the glass looked carved from marble, still, cold, deliberate. Copy every file, he said. Then delete your trail. If they trace you, I'll make sure they don't find you alive or dead. Kite laughed nervously. Already on it, boss. The call ended. Angelo leaned back, rubbing his temples. The machine he'd built, informants, bankers, soldiers, was turning its gaze not on rivals, but on the city itself. Every string he pulled led back to the same place, Le Noir. He picked up the phone. Enzo. A few minutes later, Enzo entered, tie loosened, eyes heavy. You look like hell, he said, dropping a folder onto the desk. So do you, Angelo replied. Tell me. Enzo sighed. It's worse than we thought. Calderon's not just running a racket. He's part of a protection chain. Politicians use his club to launder campaign funds. The cops cover for them. The council approves zoning deals in exchange. Everybody wins. Except the ones he hurts, Angelo murmured. Enzo hesitated. Boss, this goes high. You start pushing too hard, and it's not Calderon who'll come after you. It's City Hall. Angelo gave a low, humorless chuckle. Then I'll just have to aim higher. Later that morning, Michaela worked quietly in the East Corridor, polishing a row of gold-framed paintings. The estate was alive with movement. Guards whispering, phone calls made behind closed doors, people coming and going at odd hours. She could sense the tension humming through the walls. When Enzo passed by, she caught snippets of conversation through the slightly open study door. It's bigger than we thought, Enzo was saying. He's protected, Angelo. Untouchable. Nothing's untouchable, came Angelo's reply. His tone was ice. Everything bleeds somewhere. The words sent a shiver through her. She backed away from the door, careful not to make a sound. For the first time, she understood, whatever Angelo was doing, it wasn't just about her anymore. That evening, Angelo stood in front of a corkboard lined with photos and printouts, the web of connections branching outward like veins. Council members, judges, officers, all tethered to Rico Calderon in one way or another. Enzo hovered nearby, watching the boss trace a finger between names. If we go at this head-on, Enzo said, we'll be fighting ghosts. They'll cover for each other faster than we can prove anything. I'm not proving anything, Angelo said, eyes still on the board. I'm exposing it. Enzo frowned. You're talking about going public? Angelo nodded. Little by little. Enough to make the wolves start biting each other. Greed built this house. Fear will tear it down. Over the next week, a quiet war began. One fought not with bullets, but with whispers. Anonymous emails slipped into the inboxes of certain reporters, screenshots of bank transfers, internal memos, coded ledgers. A blog run by a local activist posted an expose about Le Noir's suspicious donations. The piece vanished within hours, but not before 10,000 people read it and started asking questions. Every night, Angelo watched the ripples spread. He didn't smile. Not once. Because he knew the system would fight back. And it did. A city news anchor hinted at rumors of corruption. The next day, her segment was pulled. Two detectives who'd started looking into Calderon were reassigned to traffic duty. One even resigned, citing pressure from above. At the estate, Enzo slammed a newspaper onto Angelo's desk. "They're burying everything. We leak, they smother. It's like the whole city's bought." Angelo poured himself a drink, amber liquid glinting under the lamp. "Then we changed the tactic." "How?" He took a slow sip. "You don't fight liars with truth, Enzo. You fight them with fear. Make the liars afraid to lie." Enzo stared at him. "You planning on making noise?" Angelo's lips curved, just slightly. "Noise gets ignored. I'm planning an echo." Meanwhile, Michaela grew increasingly uneasy. The mansion felt like a fortress now, guards on every level, cars coming at midnight and leaving before sunrise. She noticed Angelo less during the day, but his presence lingered everywhere. One night, she caught sight of him through the open doorway of his study. He stood over a desk strewn with papers, the city lights behind him painting him in silhouette. For a moment, she thought he looked almost human, tired, maybe even burdened. Then she noticed the newspaper headlines stacked beside him. Each one hinted at something she couldn't fully grasp. Police scandal rocks internal affairs. City contractor under investigation. Luna Noir silent on donation inquiries. She didn't know it yet, but those stories had come from Angelo's quiet war. Each headline was a blade slipped between the ribs of a corrupt system. And still, the machine tried to heal itself. By the end of the week, Angelo's network had mapped everything. The money, the names, the alliances. "It's like cancer," Enzo said. "Cut one part out, three more grow." Angelo lit a cigarette, the flame reflecting in his eyes. "Then we stopped trying to cut it. We poison the blood." Enzo raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "We leak everything. Not to the press. To the people." He gestured toward the files. "Social boards, online groups, local blogs. The kind that doesn't care about payoffs. The kind that spreads before the system can contain it." Enzo smirked. "You're weaponizing rumor." "I'm weaponizing truth," Angelo corrected. "Rumor's just the delivery system." And so, the next phase began. Late one night, across the city, inboxes pinged with anonymous drops, spreadsheets, receipts, secret recordings. Within hours, screenshots were trending under one name, #LunaLeaks. The system scrambled. Lawyers issued denials. Politicians claimed ignorance. Calderon himself called it a smear campaign from jealous competitors. But the cracks were already forming. In the mansion, Angelo watched the chaos unfold on his monitors. The same monitors that had once tracked enemies, now broadcasting corruption unraveling in real time. Beside him, Enzo muttered, "You really think this will change anything?" Angelo's eyes didn't leave the screen. "No," he said, "but it'll make them bleed." Somewhere in the city, a woman scrubbed bruises that still hadn't faded. Somewhere else, a man who thought himself untouchable began to sweat. And in between them, a man of shadows used the system's own secrets as his weapon. Think corruption only exists in fiction? Asterisk, asterisk, it thrives in silence. You reading this means you care, but caring isn't enough. Subscribe, stay aware, and never look away when power hides behind respectability. The rain started just after midnight, a steady hiss against the glass, soft but relentless. Inside Angelo Silvestro's office, the city looked like it was drowning in its own reflection. The glow of the monitors painted him in fractured light as Enzo entered, holding a file so thin it was almost an insult. "They're closing in," Enzo said quietly. Angelo didn't look up. "Who?" "The detectives. Santiago and Heller. Internal affairs, supposedly investigating Calderon." Angelo leaned back, cigarette burning between his fingers. "Supposedly?" Enzo slid the file across the desk. Inside were surveillance stills, Santiago meeting Calderon's driver behind a diner. Heller taking an envelope from a man tied to Luna Noir's security staff. "Money. Proof. Betrayal wrapped in plain sight. They're on Rico's payroll, Enzo said, feeding him updates about our leaks. That's why every time we move, he's one step ahead. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. Then Angelo stubbed out his cigarette, exhaling slowly. So the cops investigating him are protecting him. Enzo nodded. You said it yourself. The system bleeds everywhere. Angelo stared out the window, his reflection barely human in the glass. Then maybe it's time we cut off the blood supply. By morning, the Silvestro network was in motion. Enzo briefed the tech team, street scouts, and the handful of trusted men still untouched by politics. Angelo gave no orders at first. He only watched, thinking. He'd spent his life manipulating power, politicians, businessmen, law enforcement. He knew how they moved, how they hid behind words like justice and procedure. But this was rot pretending to be law. When he finally spoke, it was simple. Feed them what they want, he said, and make sure it kills them. 2 days later, Detectives Santiago and Heller arrived at Luna Noir, all charm and cheap confidence. Rico Calderon met them in his private lounge, cigar smoke curling through the dim light. You're sure this lead's solid? Rico asked. Santiago smirked. Came from one of Silvestro's guys. Big shipment coming into the docks. Says it's guns, unregistered. You take that down, the feds back off you for a while. Rico's laugh was low and lazy. Silvestro's people giving me free gifts now? How generous. Maybe they're trying to cut a deal, Heller said. Either way, you win. What they didn't know was that Angelo was watching from a live feed across the city. Every word, every movement, recorded from the bug Enzo's men planted under the table 2 nights before. When Rico toasted his glass to a profitable partnership, Angelo's jaw tightened. He's buying it, Enzo said beside him. Angelo didn't answer. He was watching Santiago's eyes, the way they darted toward the door, calculating, nervous. Rats, the both of them. Make the call, he said finally. 3 nights later, the docks lit up with blue lights and chaos. Unmarked vans rolled in. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed the shipping containers. Cameras followed, flashes cutting through the fog like lightning. By dawn, news headlines screamed. FBI sting exposes corrupt detectives in police internal collusion. Santiago and Heller were let out in cuffs, still in their suits, faces pale under the spotlights. Reporters shouted questions. Someone yelled. They were working with Calderon. The footage ran on every major network before sunrise. The city's faith in its own police cracked like glass. In the mansion, Angelo watched the broadcast with a blank expression. Enzo poured himself a drink, his laughter sharp and disbelieving. You did it, he said. You actually fed the bastards their own news. Angelo didn't reply. His gaze was distant, fixed on the screen as the 2 detectives were shoved into armored vans. It's not done, he said quietly. This is just the prelude. By noon, the media had shifted focus. Anonymous leaks suggested the sting had been set up with inside information, data pulled from encrypted networks, private accounts, and police servers. The FBI refused to comment. The department went into lockdown. And within hours, whispers began. Who was the source? In the mansion kitchen, Michaela overheard the house staff whispering about it. They say it came from someone outside law enforcement, one of them said. An anonymous leak. Somebody fed the FBI everything. Michaela froze mid-step, her hands gripping the tray so hard her knuckles turned white. Later that day, she saw Angelo in the hall, speaking quietly with Enzo. The same calm, unreadable mask he always wore. She waited until Enzo left, then stepped forward. Mr. Silvestro, she began softly. He looked up, one brow lifting. Michaela, you shouldn't be out here this late. I heard about the detectives, she said. The FBI sting. They said it came from an anonymous source. And her voice faltered, but she held his gaze. Was it you? Angelo studied her for a long moment. Those bruises still faint on her wrists, her eyes filled with equal parts fear and admiration. Finally, he exhaled. Anonymous means no one knows, doesn't it? That's not an answer, she whispered. He gave a half smile, tired, shadowed. Maybe that's the point. She wanted to push, but something in his tone stopped her. Instead, she nodded and turned to go. As she disappeared down the corridor, Enzo stepped out from the shadows. She's smart, he said. Angelo's eyes lingered on the empty hall. Smarter than most of us. That night, Angelo sat alone in his office. The monitors still played muted news footage, talking heads arguing about corruption, justice, and reform. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking softly. You wanted to clean the city, Enzo had said earlier, but you just showed everyone how dirty it really is. And maybe that was true. For every corrupt cop exposed, 3 more filled the void. For every truth leaked, another lie rose to bury it. The system didn't collapse, it adapted. Angelo thought about Michaela, the fear in her eyes the first time he'd seen her, the quiet strength since. Somewhere in her story, he saw a mirror of his own. She'd survived a man like Calderon. He'd become one. He set the glass down and leaned back in his chair, the city skyline bleeding orange through the rain. You wanted justice, he muttered to himself, and you built it out of lies. He looked down at the folder on his desk, Rico's smiling face, his arm draped over a politician's shoulder. The same picture he'd seen 100 times. But tonight, it looked different. Not as a target, as a reflection. Maybe the rot wasn't just in the city. Maybe it had been in him all along, growing quietly, hidden behind good intentions and expensive suits. The difference, he thought bitterly, was that his rot still remembered what it felt like to bleed. Outside, thunder cracked over the lake. Inside, Angelo Silvestro stared into the storm, and for the first time, wondered whether he was still the one setting the traps, or finally stepping into one of his own. Ever think you've spotted corruption only to look away? Asterisk asterisk. This is how it thrives, quiet, patient, feeding on hesitation. The ones who noticed and acted survived. The ones who didn't became its next story. Subscribe, stay aware, and remember, the darkest traps are the ones we build for ourselves. The mansion slept under a blanket of rain. Wind howled across the lake, rattling the windows like restless ghosts. Down the hall, every room was dark except one, the study, where Angelo Silvestro sat alone beneath the glow of his desk lamp, reading over files that no longer felt like victories. Michaela had been pacing outside that door for 10 minutes. Her palms were slick with sweat, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd spent days debating whether to tell him, whether to risk the fragile peace she'd found here. But she knew it couldn't wait. Not after what she'd discovered. Her hand trembled as she knocked. Come in. Angelo's voice came, calm and unreadable. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and rain. Papers were scattered across the desk, news articles, photos, encrypted drives. The city's corruption laid bare in black and white. Michaela, he said, setting his pen aside. It's late. You should be resting. I can't, she whispered. He studied her for a moment. Her shoulders were tense, eyes shadowed. Something wrong. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed don't, but secrets had already ruined too many pieces of her life. There's something I need to tell you, she said finally. Angelo gestured toward the chair opposite him. Then sit. Let's not make confessions on tired feet. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them, steady and rhythmic. When I worked for Rico, Michaela began softly. I wasn't always cleaning tables and scrubbing floors. He used to make me sit in meetings, write things down, track who came and went. He said it was just bookkeeping. She swallowed hard. But I found out later it wasn't bookkeeping. It was trafficking. Money, people, sometimes both. Angelo's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to grow heavier. One night, I tried to tell someone. I went to the police. I gave them names, places. I thought it would stop him. She looked up, eyes glistening. It didn't. The report vanished. They said there wasn't enough evidence. Weeks later, I found out why. Because the police were paid, Angelo said quietly. She nodded. Rico made sure of it. But there was something else. One of the warehouses I mentioned in my report, it wasn't his. It belonged to someone else. Someone connected to your family. The silence was instant and absolute. Angelo's gaze sharpened, his hand resting slowly on the desk. What do you mean? I didn't know at the time, she said quickly. I just wanted to protect my sister. She'd been working there part-time. I thought if I testified, it would make her safe. I didn't realize who I was hurting. Her voice cracked. The police raided the warehouse. They seized everything: drugs, weapons, money. I saw the news later. They said it was a Silvestro property. Angelo's jaw tightened. He remembered. 10 years ago, one of his smaller arms depots had been hit by federal agents. Millions in assets gone overnight. He'd never known how they'd found it, until now. He rose from his chair slowly, stepping toward the window. The lamplight caught the edge of his profile, sharp, carved from shadow. Michaela's breath hitched. I didn't know it was yours. I swear I didn't. If I had. He turned, and for a heartbeat, his expression was unreadable. The man standing before her wasn't the one who'd saved her from fear. He was the one the city feared. The man whose name whispered power and death. Her knees felt weak. If you want me gone, I understand. I just couldn't keep lying to you. The silence that followed was a noose tightening around her throat. Then Angelo spoke, soft, deliberate. You did what the law wouldn't. Michaela blinked. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. You saw something wrong, and you tried to stop it. You didn't do it for money or power. You did it to protect someone. That makes you family in my book. Her eyes widened. You're not angry? He gave a faint, humorless smile. If I killed everyone who's ever cost me money, I'd be drinking alone in hell by now. He leaned forward, resting his palms on the desk. The men who ran that warehouse deserved worse than a raid. You didn't betray me, Michaela. You reminded me what the world forgets, that the law only works when someone's willing to bleed for it. She exhaled shakily, relief flooding her face. I thought you'd. I know what you thought, he interrupted gently. And the fact you told me anyway says more than your secret ever could. For the first time, he saw her differently, not just as the woman he'd vowed to protect, but as someone who'd once stood against men like him, unarmed and unafraid. The storm outside deepened. Thunder rolled over the mansion, echoing like distant gunfire. Michaela looked down at the floor. You said justice has teeth, but sometimes I think maybe it bites the wrong people. Angelo poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. Justice bites whoever sticks their hand in the wrong place, he said. But you? You bit back. That takes guts. She took the glass, her fingers brushing his. For a moment, neither moved. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. Don't, he replied. Just don't run. A faint smile ghosted her lips. I stopped running the moment you found out. Angelo looked at her, really looked at her. The bruises had faded, but the fear hadn't vanished. It had simply turned into something else. Strength, defiance, survival. You think this city is broken, he said, his tone quieter now. You're wrong. It's not broken. It's built this way, on silence and compromise. The difference is, you try to break that. And you? She asked. What are you trying to do? He met her gaze. I'm trying to decide whether I'm still part of the disease or finally becoming the cure. Hours later, after she left, Angelo remained in his study, staring at the empty glass in his hand. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside hadn't. He thought about the raid years ago, the betrayal he'd blamed on fate, the blood he'd spilled afterward. All this time, it had been her, a frightened woman trying to protect her sister. And now she was under his roof, sitting where men twice as dangerous had knelt and begged for their lives. He smiled faintly, almost to himself. Family, he repeated. God help us all. Sometimes truth saves you. Sometimes it gets you killed. But silence. Silence buries you alive. Don't gamble with ignorance. Subscribe, Stay ahead of the shadows. Because the ones who pretend evil doesn't exist always meet it unprepared. The city looked almost beautiful that night. Glittering towers, warm streetlights reflected on rain-slick pavement, laughter spilling from champagne halls. But beauty in Chicago was like perfume on rot. It only hid the decay for a while. Angelo Silvestro stood by the wide windows of his penthouse suite, overlooking the skyline. Below, the grand ballroom of the Langston Hotel pulsed with life. The city's elite, councilmen, donors, police commissioners, and socialites were gathering for a charity fundraiser. Rebuild Chicago, the banners read, though everyone in the room knew it was really about rebuilding reputations. Enzo approached from behind, adjusting his cufflinks. Everything's in place. Our little fireworks will go off the moment the mayor finishes his speech. Angelo nodded, calm as still water. And Luna Noir? Right on schedule. Enzo's lips curved. Our people rigged it clean. No casualties. Just fire and truth. Angelo didn't answer. He reached for the whiskey glass on the table, watching the amber liquid catch the city lights. Tonight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction, a rebalancing of a scale the law refused to touch. At exactly 9:14 p.m., the mayor's voice boomed through the ballroom. Tonight, we celebrate unity. A flicker of static cut through the sound system. The massive LED screen behind him blinked once, twice, then changed. Silence fell. The mayor turned, confused, as the first image appeared. Rico Calderon, smiling at a bar table with a city councilman, stacks of cash between them. The next slide, a document, digitally signed, transferring club funds to an offshore account. Then another, a photo of a crying woman, time-stamped from Luna Noir's surveillance camera. Her bruises, her terror, undeniable. Gasps erupted across the room. The slideshow continued, relentless. Wire transfers, emails, photos of politicians shaking hands with Rico. A video clip played, muffled audio, but clear enough to hear Rico say, "The cops don't touch me. They owe me." Reporters, who'd been invited for publicity, leapt to their feet. Cameras flashed like lightning. Enzo murmured beside Angelo, "You think they'll believe it all?" Angelo's gaze never left the chaos below. They don't have to believe. They just have to see. 15 miles away, the night shifted from revelation to ruin. Luna Noir, the neon-lit jewel of Rico Calderon's empire, stood at the edge of the river, black glass and silver steel, a cathedral for sin. Inside, the club was empty, its lights cut, the air thick with the scent of cleaning chemicals. At 9:17, a timer clicked. A single spark found its way into a vent, racing down the corridor like a whisper. Within seconds, flames licked up the walls, not explosive, but deliberate. Controlled. Every exit already cleared, every target pre-calculated. By 9:25, smoke billowed through the skylights, visible for blocks. Fire alarms screamed, sprinklers hissed, but the blaze burned too hot. When firefighters arrived, they didn't just find fire. They found safes. Cracked open by heat and time, the steel boxes spilled their secrets. Ledgers, flash drives, stacks of cash wrapped in government envelopes. The evidence spoke louder than any confession could. By 10 p.m., the city's pulse was unrecognizable. Headlines exploded across every screen, every phone, every broadcast. City kingpin exposed. Connections reach City Hall. Luna Noir in flames. Corruption evidence found inside. FBI confirms investigation into police, politicians, and business figures. The fundraiser turned into a riot of panic. Half the guests fled, others shouted for lawyers. One councilman fainted as reporters swarmed. The mayor tried to regain control, but the screens behind him still glowed with Rico's smirking face. Enzo, watching beside Angelo, let out a low whistle. "You've just turned Chicago into a chessboard on fire." Angelo finally spoke. "Good. Maybe now, they'll see what burns when you feed it lies." Meanwhile, Across town, Rico Calderon stumbled through the back door of a dive bar, his face pale, phone buzzing nonstop. He'd been drinking since sunset, desperate to drown the unease crawling under his skin. When he saw the breaking news on the TV over the counter, he froze. His own face filled the screen. His club in flames. His bank accounts displayed like trophies. What the hell? His phone rang again. One of his allies, a councilman, screaming, "You idiot, it's all over the news. They have everything." Rico dropped the phone. His hands shook. "No," he muttered. "It's impossible. Nobody could have." But even as he said it, he remembered that day at the Silvestro estate. The way Angelo had looked at him once, years ago, like a man measuring the weight of a sin before deciding the punishment. Rico's breath came fast. Silvestro. Back at the Langston, Angelo stepped onto the rooftop balcony. The city stretched below him, sirens echoing from a dozen directions, lights flashing like war signals. He lit a cigarette and watched the plume of smoke from Luna Noir rising in the distance. To the world, it was chaos. To him, it was music. The night air carried the scent of rain and smoke, sharp and cold. He exhaled slowly. "This is what justice smells like," he murmured. Enzo joined him, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You think it'll stick? That they'll pay for it?" Angelo's eyes narrowed on the skyline. "Some will. Most won't. But that's not the point." "Then what is?" He flicked the ash off his cigarette, his tone even. "To remind them that even the untouchable can bleed." Enzo nodded, quiet admiration in his gaze. "You could have just killed him." "I could have," Angelo said. "But blood dries fast. Shame doesn't." Below, the city writhed. Power brokers calling their lawyers, journalists chasing leads, the public devouring the scandal. It was a storm, yes, but one that washed filth off marble. Inside the mansion, hours later, Michaela sat by the television, watching the chaos unfold. Her heart pounded as Rico's name dominated every headline, every broadcast. The monster who'd hurt her, reduced to evidence, ashes, and fear. Her hands trembled, but not from terror this time. Relief had weight too, and it was crushing. She turned off the TV, tears glinting in her eyes. Somewhere, she knew, Angelo was watching the same fire. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in her war. High above the city, Angelo remained at the edge of the balcony, the last embers of his cigarette glowing like a dying star. Behind him, Enzo's phone buzzed. "The feds are moving in. Rico's people are scattering." Angelo didn't turn. "Let them run. The city will eat them alive before dawn." A pause. "You ever think," Enzo said carefully, "that you're becoming what you hate?" Angelo's expression hardened, eyes fixed on the burning horizon. "Maybe. But if the city's afraid tonight, then it's finally feeling what it's made the rest of us feel for years." He crushed the cigarette under his shoe, watching the glow die out. "Fear," he said quietly. "It's the only language this city understands." And somewhere far below, Luna Noir continued to burn, not as an ending, but as a warning. The city hadn't slept since the fire. Sirens tore through the night. News choppers circled above like vultures, and the name Rico Calderon pulsed across every screen like a curse. But in a forgotten corner of South Chicago, one apartment window still glowed. Michaela D. Perez sat on her couch, trembling, clutching a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The television flickered, endless coverage of Rico's downfall. Photos, documents, footage of Luna Noir in ruins. Each word was a dagger of justice. City kingpin exposed. FBI confirms multiple arrests. Rico Calderon wanted for questioning. She should have felt safe. She should have felt free. But deep down, she knew monsters didn't die that easily. A soft click from the door broke the silence. Michaela froze. She hadn't locked it after the neighbor stopped by earlier. The doorknob turned. Then, the door slammed open. Rico staggered inside, drenched in sweat and rain, eyes wild. His once-tailored suit was torn, the smell of whiskey clinging to him like poison. In his shaking hand, a pistol gleamed under the flickering light. "You think you can ruin me?" he slurred, spittle flying. "You think you can just hide behind that freak Silvestro and watch me burn?" Michaela backed away, her pulse hammering. "Rico, please. Shut up." He waved the gun wildly, knocking a lamp off the table. "I gave you everything. I made you, and you repay me with this." He pointed toward the TV where his own mugshot stared back. Michaela's voice cracked. "You did this to yourself. Liar," Rico roared, lunging forward. Then a voice from the corner stopped him cold. "No, she's right." Rico spun around. From the shadows near the doorway, Angelo Silvestro stepped forward, calm, composed, his black coat slick with rain. Two men in suits flanked the apartment's dim hall behind him, silent as ghosts. Angelo's eyes, dark and steady, fixed on Rico. "You hurt someone under my roof." Rico's laugh was high, broken. "Oh, this is rich." The great Angelo Silvestro, pretending to be some kind of saint. "You think your hands are clean?" Angelo didn't blink. "No, but I don't use them on the weak." Rico aimed the gun at him, but his hand shook. "You think you've won? I still have friends." "No," Angelo interrupted quietly. "You had friends. Now you have fire, scandal, and a federal task force with your name on it." He reached into his coat. Rico flinched, but instead of a weapon, Angelo pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen and tossed it onto the floor. The video playing was live. Helicopters over Luna Noir's ashes. FBI agents hauling out evidence crates. Reporters shouting, Rico Calderon's empire has collapsed overnight. Rico stared, breath ragged. You did this." Angelo nodded once. "Every file, every name, every deal. All yours. All public." Rico lunged toward the phone, shouting incoherently. One of Angelo's men moved faster, slamming him to the ground, the gun clattering across the floor. Rico kicked, screamed, but he was no longer a threat. Just a man drowning in his own undoing. Angelo crouched beside him, voice soft but cold enough to cut steel. "Consider this mercy, because if I were you, I'd pray the law gets to you before I do." Rico spat at him. "You think you're better than me?" Angelo leaned closer, his tone almost a whisper. "No, just smarter. And I know when a beast is too pathetic to kill." He stood, adjusting his coat. "Call them in," he told Enzo, who stepped from the hall, phone already in hand. Rico froze. "Call who?" Angelo didn't answer. The distant sound of sirens began to grow louder, flashing blue and red against the apartment's windows. "You set me up," Rico shrieked. "You can't do this." Angelo gave him a long, quiet look. "I didn't set you up, Rico. I just stopped protecting you from yourself." He turned toward Michaela, who stood pale and trembling near the kitchen wall. "You should leave before they arrive," he said softly. "You don't need to see what happens next." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He would have killed me tonight." "I know." Her lips trembled. "Why didn't you just let him burn with his club?" Angelo's gaze softened, just slightly. "Because fire only cleans what you can see. The rest, you have to drag into the light." Rico screamed as agents pounded on the door. "You're gonna rot for this, Silvestro." Angelo's eyes flicked to him one last time. "No, Rico. You already are." The door burst open. FBI jackets filled the room, weapons raised. Angelo and his men stepped aside wordlessly, blending into the shadows as agents swarmed Rico, pinning him to the ground. "Rico Calderon, you're under arrest for racketeering, trafficking, and obstruction of justice." The words hit him like a hammer. He thrashed, cursed, begged. "You can't do this to me. I own this city." But no one was listening anymore. Minutes later, Angelo stood in the alley below, rain falling steady now. The flashing lights above painted the wet pavement red and blue. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face, calm, unreadable, resolute. Enzo joined him, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You sure you don't want to stay for the show?" Angelo exhaled smoke into the rain. I've seen enough men beg for their lives. The ending's always the same. Enzo nodded. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Maybe that's worse than what you could have done. That's the point, Angelo said quietly. Mercy can be sharper than any bullet. They walked toward the black car waiting at the curb. Behind them, Rico's screams echoed from the apartment as reporters shouted his name, cameras flashing through the rain-soaked glass. By morning, the footage would be everywhere. Rico Calderon, the untouchable king, dragged away in handcuffs, his empire ash and evidence. And in every newsroom, every household, one question would whisper beneath the headlines. Who brought him down? Angelo Silvestro never answered questions. He just watched the city burn, then quietly rebuilt it in his own image. Michaela stood by her window long after the agents left, the sirens fading into the night. Somewhere in the chaos, she caught a glimpse of Angelo's car turning the corner, disappearing into the fog. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering into the quiet, "Thank you." Because he'd done what no law ever could, turned power against itself. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. In life, monsters often wear suits and smiles, but there are still those who make them fall. If you'd rather see justice than fear, subscribe. Because stories like this remind you, silence only protects the wrong side. Morning broke like a confession. The sky over Chicago was the color of bruised steel, but light still cut through the clouds, thin, sharp, and relentless. Newspapers hit doorsteps across the city like gunshots. Every headline screamed the same thing. Massive political scandal rocks Chicago. Rico Calderon's downfall exposes citywide corruption. Police commissioner, 3 councilmen, and federal prosecutor indicted. Silvestro connection? Authorities declined to comment. The streets buzzed with disbelief. Anchors on morning talk shows spoke his name in cautious tones. Angelo R. Silvestro. Some called him a menace, others a necessary evil. But no one, not even his enemies, could deny what had happened. A criminal had done what the law couldn't. In one night, the city's rot had been gutted open, and it was bleeding daylight. From his balcony, high above the waking city, Angelo watched it all unfold. The air was crisp, still carrying the faint scent of rain and smoke. Below, Chicago churned, sirens, horns, and the distant echo of breaking news. He leaned against the railing, coffee in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up. For the first time in years, he wasn't reviewing shipments or security feeds. He was simply watching the world he'd just turned upside down. Enzo stepped out onto the balcony behind him. "You've been on every station since dawn," he said, smirking faintly. "Half the city thinks you're a ghost. The other half thinks you're some kind of criminal saint." Angelo finished, his mouth curving. Enzo chuckled. "Something like that. They'll forget soon enough," Angelo said, taking a slow sip. "People always do. Fear fades faster than truth." Enzo shrugged. "Maybe. But this time, they're afraid of the right people." He placed a folder on the table beside them. "Cleanup's underway. Calderon's people are scattering. FBI's raiding what's left of his accounts. The politicians are lawyering up. And the rest?" Angelo asked. "Some are talking. Some are running. But they're all looking over their shoulders." Angelo nodded, eyes still fixed on the skyline. "Good." Then, after a long pause, he added softly, "Let them learn what it feels like to be hunted." Across the city, Michaela D. Perez stood on the sidewalk outside a small cafe. Her breath clouded in the cold air as she looked down at a folded newspaper in her hands. The front page bore Rico's face, not the smug, untouchable man she once feared, but a hollow-eyed criminal being led in handcuffs through a courthouse hallway. The caption read, "Calderon faces life sentence. Sources confirm cooperation with federal agents." She traced the edges of the page with trembling fingers. He was gone. The monster who haunted her dreams had become just another headline. And for the first time in years, The silence around her didn't feel dangerous, it felt peaceful. A soft breeze swept past, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and wet pavement. She closed her eyes, breathing it in like freedom. Inside the cafe, a waitress smiled at her. "You okay, hon?" Michaela smiled faintly. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I think I finally am." That afternoon, she returned to the Silvestro estate one last time. The marble floors gleamed under the soft gold light, the grand hall quiet except for the hum of distant conversation. Every sound here used to fill her with dread. Now it felt almost like home. She found Angelo in his study, standing by the window again, watching the city as if it were a chessboard he'd just finished clearing. "You look different," he said without turning. "I slept," she replied with a small smile. "Didn't dream of him this time." "That's something." Michaela stepped closer. "I wanted to thank you for everything." Angelo finally turned. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, usually sharp, cold, held something quieter. "Don't thank me, Michaela. You didn't need saving. You just needed someone to remind the world that you mattered." She shook her head. "Maybe, but you risked everything for this." He chuckled dryly. "I've risked more for less." Her gaze softened. "What happens now?" He looked back out the window, where the sun was starting to pierce the clouds. "Now, the city will chew itself apart trying to rewrite the story. The powerful will pretend they didn't know. The guilty will find new names to hide behind. And you?" He exhaled slowly. "I'll do what I always do, keep the balance." She hesitated, then stepped closer, voice barely a whisper. "Do you ever get tired of it? Fighting shadows?" Angelo smiled faintly. "Only when they start winning." They stood there for a long moment in the quiet, sunlight spilling across the floor between them. "Justice isn't clean, Michaela," he said at last. "It's never been. But it's worth the mess." Her eyes glistened. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "If I didn't, I'd have stopped a long time ago." Outside, the sky had turned gold. The rain had washed the soot from the streets, and the city, wounded but alive, glimmered beneath it. Michaela walked through the front doors of the Silvestro mansion, carrying a small box of her things. At the gate, she paused and looked back. Angelo stood on the balcony above, one hand resting on the railing. For a brief second, their eyes met, hers full of gratitude, his of quiet pride. She gave a small nod, then turned and walked down the long driveway, the wind brushing through her hair like a blessing. As the gates closed behind her, Angelo looked toward the horizon, the sun breaking through storm clouds, casting light over the city's jagged skyline. Behind every skyscraper lay stories of corruption, greed, and fear. But beneath that, just barely visible, were stories like hers. The kind that didn't make the papers, but changed everything anyway. He thought of her words, her fear, her strength, and something in him shifted. Maybe redemption didn't come from confession. Maybe it came from choosing, even once, to do the right thing when it cost you everything. He took one last sip of cold coffee and whispered to the empty air, "Some wars are fought with guns, others with truth. Both leave scars." Then he turned away from the window, the dawn spreading light across his back. For the first time in years, Angelo Silvestro felt something close to peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one.